I'm reluctant to go into it in any detail and at any length again because
James Taylor and Carly Simon were the golden couple of the 1970s, two stars at the peak of their fame, married in front of Paul Simon, announcing it to the world at Radio City Music Hall. But behind that perfect image, something was very wrong. There was a secret apartment just blocks from their home. There was another woman named Evey, and there was a confession that put Carly's health at risk. For nearly 40 years, James stayed silent about what really happened. Then in March 2020, at 72 years old, he finally told the truth. What he admitted changed everything. James Vernon Taylor was born on March 12, 1948, at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston, a place that already felt familiar, because his father, Isaac M. Taylor, worked there as a resident physician. From the very start, James entered a world shaped by comfort, history, and expectation. His family traced its roots back to Edmund Rice, one of the early English settlers who helped establish Massachusetts in the 1600s, and that lineage carried a quiet weight. Isaac came from a wealthy Southern family with money and influence, while James's mother, Gertrude Woodard, had studied voice at the New England Conservatory of Music before setting aside her own ambitions to marry Isaac in 1946. Between 1947 and 1953, she gave birth to 5 children in just 6 years. Alex arrived in 1947, James in 1948, Kate in 1949, Livingston in 1950, and Hugh in 1952. What looked like privilege on the surface slowly grew into something unusual. A household where every child would eventually record albums and chase music in their own way. When James was only 3 years old in 1951, the family moved south to Chapel Hill, North Carolina, after Isaac accepted a role as assistant professor of medicine at the University of North Carolina School of Medicine. They built a custom home near Morgan Creek, surrounded by trees and quiet, a place James later described as beautiful but lonely. Life there moved slowly, but summers told a different story. Starting in 1953, when James was 5, the family spent every summer on Martha's Vineyard, an island known for wealth, art, and long afternoons by the water. This back and forth between North Carolina and New England shaped him. One world was southern and restrained. The other felt open and creative. On the vineyard in the summer of 1963, when James was 15, he met Danny Korchmar, another young guitarist with the same restless energy. They began playing together in coffee houses, calling themselves Jamie and Cooch, not knowing how important that meeting would later become. Nearby, Gertrude owned a home overlooking Stonewall Pond in Chilmark, a place she loved deeply, and where she would spend her final years, passing away in 2015 at age 92. While the outside world saw success and stability, cracks were already forming inside the family. Isaac's career kept rising, and from 1964 to 1971, he served as dean of the UNC Chapel Hill Medical School, a position that placed him at the top of academic medicine. Years earlier, though, he had made a choice that quietly reshaped the family. From 1955 to 1957, he volunteered as a lieutenant commander in the U.S. Naval Reserve Medical Corps and left for Antarctica to serve as chief medical officer at McMurdo Station. For nearly 2 years, Gertrude was left alone with 5 young children, all between the ages of 3 and 8. Isaac carried his own wounds. His father had been an alcoholic failure, and reminders of that shame followed him. By the late 1960s, Isaac's drinking spiraled out of control. Alcohol overwhelmed him, strained his marriage, and bled into every corner of family life. He battled infidelity and attempted suicide before dying in 1995. Years later, James would say that his father's alcoholism played a role in the death of his older brother Alex in 1993. Through all of this, music never stopped flowing through the house. Gertrude filled the home with sound and expectation. She made sure each child learned an instrument and took part in music together. James started with the cello in North Carolina, learning bass clef and developing an ear for structure and rhythm. That early training quietly shaped the finger-picking guitar style he would later become known for. By age 12 in 1960, he switched to guitar. At 14, he wrote his first song. What followed was rare. All 5 siblings pursued music seriously. Alex recorded 5 studio albums rooted in blues and southern rock. Kate released 7 albums blending folk and roots. Livingston went even further, eventually releasing 15 albums. James reached 20 studio albums by 2025. Gertrude supported them all while also painting, weaving, photographing, gardening, cooking with pride, and even walking picket lines to protest segregation during the Civil Rights era. Yet beneath the talent and opportunity, something darker took hold. James later described his family as carrying a mysterious darkness, something inherited and unspoken. In 1964, at age 16, he slipped into severe depression. His grades collapsed. He slept as much as 20 hours a day. By late 1965, at 17 and deeply suicidal, he made a decision that stunned everyone. He checked himself into McLean Hospital in Belmont, Massachusetts. It was not forced by his parents. He knew he could not survive otherwise. He spent 9 months there, treated with Thorazine, a powerful medication that dulled emotion and slowed time. The structured days gave him his first real sense of order in months. He even completed high school there, graduating in 1966 through McLean's Arlington School. During that time, the Vietnam Draft Board summoned him for evaluation. He arrived unable to speak, escorted by 2 white-suited hospital attendants. The military rejected him immediately on psychological grounds. At a time when nearly anyone was being sent to war, he was deemed too unstable to serve. It saved his life, but it also stamped his illness into official record. For a family built on reputation and achievement, this was devastating. His father was dean of a major medical school. His mother was classically trained. Their son was institutionalized. Behind closed doors, the irony cut even deeper. The family owned a sanitarium dedicated to treating opioid addiction, a quiet sign that substance abuse had been present in their history long before James fell apart. When James left McLean in mid-1966, he did not ease back into life. He ran. He went straight to New York City and settled into the East Village, chasing music with urgency rather than healing. He played guitar in Washington Square Park to keep the darkness away. His apartment became a place where runaways drifted in and out. He formed a band called The Flying Machine and began performing regularly at the Night Owl Cafe in Greenwich Village, earning only $12 a night. They recorded 7 songs in a single 3-hour session at Select Sound Studios in late 1966. A double-sided single was released in 1967, but it went nowhere. Even the band felt the recordings were weak. What mattered more was what crept in through the back door. The drummer used heroin. James tried it. He later said that the moment opiates entered his life, he was gone. The addiction hit fast and hard. By 1967, the Flying Machine collapsed. James became useless to himself and everyone around him. By January 1968, he fled New York completely and returned home in defeat, a 20-year-old whose first real chance had already burned out. Around that same time, a deeper tragedy unfolded. His childhood friend, Suzanne Schneer, 19 years old and struggling with her own mental illness, took her life on May 14, 1968, by jumping in front of a subway train in New York City. Fearing the impact on James, his family hid the truth from him for 6 months. When he finally learned what had happened, the loss poured into his songwriting. Suzanne lived on in Fire and Rain, a song shaped by grief he had not been allowed to face in real time. James tried treatment again and again. He cycled through heroin, methamphetamine, methadone, hospitals in New York and England, and eventually the Austin Riggs Center in Massachusetts. Even after achieving sobriety in 1971, he relapsed 18 months later. It would take until September 1983, after the deaths of close friends and his desire to be a better father, for him to finally step away from methadone and heroin for good. In late 1967, with almost nothing left, James went to London. He was 19, carrying a small inheritance and a final hope. He lived hand-to-mouth in neighborhoods like Notting Hill and Chelsea, recording cheap demos and wandering the streets with his guitar. His American prospects were gone, and England felt like the last door still open. Through Danny Korchmar, a demo reached Peter Asher, who had just taken charge of A&R at Apple Records. An audition was arranged. James sat on the floor with his guitar and played in front of Paul McCartney and George Harrison. They listened quietly, then told Asher to sign him. In 1968, James Taylor became the first non-British artist signed to Apple Records. Paul McCartney played bass on his sessions. George Harrison contributed as well. He recorded his debut album at Trident Studios, while the Beatles worked on the White Album down the hall. The record was released in December 1968 in the UK and February 1969 in the United States. It sold only 8,000 copies in Britain and failed to chart in America. The single stalled at number 118. James was hospitalized and unable to promote it. It should have ended there. Instead, Peter Asher made a decision that changed everything. In 1969, he resigned from his prestigious role at Apple Records and moved to the United States to manage James personally. He walked away from the biggest band in the world to bet on a broken American songwriter. That faith carried James into the next chapter of his life, where pain, recovery, and music would finally begin to align. In 1969, while recording his second album in California, James Taylor's life quietly fell apart even as the music began to take shape. 2 years earlier, he had been treated for heroin addiction at McLean Hospital in Massachusetts, and for a short time, it seemed like he had survived the worst of it. But during his first album period in London, heroin was cheap and easy to get through the city's maintenance programs, and the pull was stronger than his control. When he returned to the United States, the habit came with him, heavier than before. By the time he started working on what would later become Sweet Baby James, he no longer had a stable place to live. He drifted from producer Peter Asher's house to guitarist Danny Korchmar's apartment, sleeping on couches, carrying his guitar and his addiction wherever he went. The irony was brutal. He was writing the songs that would make him famous, while slowly tearing himself apart. Hospital visits became common. His body weakened. His mind grew darker. Yet the pain seeped into the music, line by line, turning into something raw and honest that listeners would later feel as if it were written directly for them. At the time, though, it came at a severe cost to his health, both physical and mental. After a relapse, and after a motorcycle accident in Martha's Vineyard forced him to stop moving for a while, something shifted. That long, painful recovery gave him months to sit with his songs. He rewrote them. He stripped them down. By the time he entered Sunset Sound Recorders in Los Angeles between December 8th and December 17th, 1969, he was ready in a way he had never been before. The entire Sweet Baby James album was recorded in just 3 days, for only $7,600, which would be about $65,000 in 2024. He later said that he walked into the studio more than prepared. The sessions were quiet and intimate. Carole King sat at the piano, Red Rhodes added steel guitar, Russ Kunkel played drums using brushes instead of sticks. Randy Meisner handled bass on Country Road and Blossom. There was nothing flashy. When the album came out in February 1970, it changed everything. James Taylor went from being a forgotten Apple Records artist to a rising star almost overnight. The vulnerability in the songs felt new. It felt like someone had finally said the quiet parts out loud. One of those songs had been written earlier, during a different kind of recovery. Fire and Rain came together while James was staying at the Austin Riggs Center, a private psychiatric facility and drug rehab. The opening lines were not poetic inventions. They came from real loss. Suzanne Schnurr was a close friend from the New York music scene, and she had died by suicide. James did not learn about her death until 6 months later, because people around him believed the truth might destroy him, while his career was just beginning. She had been placed in isolation and could not cope. When the news finally reached him, It cut deep. The second verse of the song turned inward. Lines asking Jesus for help were not symbolic. They were desperate. He was trying to survive heroin withdrawal, trying to make it through another day without collapsing. Fire and Rain became a diary set to melody, a record of hospital stays, failed attempts at sobriety, and grief that had nowhere to go. The pain only fed his anxiety, and the anxiety fed the addiction, creating a loop he struggled to escape. When Fire and Rain was released as a single in August 1970, James had no idea what would happen next. In September, it climbed to number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100 and stayed on the chart for 16 weeks. It reached number 2 in Canada and ended the year at number 67 on Billboard's year-end Hot 100 for 1970. He was stunned. He later admitted that he never thought people would care about his life, especially the darkest parts of it. Songs about suicide, addiction, and psychiatric treatment were not supposed to be hits. Yet millions of people heard themselves in his words. Without realizing it, James Taylor had opened the door to a new kind of popular music. That song became the spark for an entire movement. Confessional songwriting moved from the margins to the center of popular culture, especially around Laurel Canyon in the early 1970s. The success of Fire and Rain cleared the path for albums like Mudslide Slim and The Blue Horizon in 1971, Carole King's Tapestry, and Joni Mitchell's Blue. Vulnerability was no longer weakness, it was power. Years later, James Taylor's greatest hits album would be certified diamond, selling over 12,000 copies in the United States alone. But it all traced back to that moment when honesty proved it could sell. While his music was reshaping the industry, his personal life took a sudden turn in 1971. On April 6th, he walked into the Troubadour in Los Angeles and met Carly Simon. At the time, both were already huge stars. James had just appeared on the cover of Time magazine on March 1st, 1971. Carly had seen the cover and told her sister she was going to marry him. James was riding high on Sweet Baby James, and his single, You've Got a Friend, was on its way to becoming his only #1 hit. Carly had just won the Grammy Award for Best New Artist, and her debut album featured a top 10 song. They met backstage while Carly was opening for Cat Stevens, and the connection was immediate. She offered to cook him dinner. He said, tonight. By the fall, they were living together. To the outside world, it looked like destiny unfolding in real time. They married on November 3, 1972, in a small ceremony at Paul Simon's Manhattan apartment. That same night, they walked onto the stage at Radio City Music Hall and announced their marriage to the audience. The image was perfect. Two beautiful, talented artists at the height of their powers. In 1974, their duet Mockingbird became a gold-certified top 10 hit. In 1978, Devoted to You reached the top 40. Carly's album Boys in the Trees would later sell over 1,000 copies. Driven by the top 10 hit You Belong to Me, they were everywhere, celebrated as the golden couple of the decade. But even before the wedding, cracks had formed. The night before they married, the phone rang while they were in bed. It was Bianca Jagger. She warned James not to go through with the wedding, claiming Carly was involved with Mick Jagger. James defended Carly and said he trusted her completely. The wedding went on, but the seed had been planted. Years later, Carly would confirm in her memoir that there had been intense emotional tension with Mick Jagger, a connection she described as electric and unresolved. Even after her marriage, Mick continued reaching out. The shadow never fully lifted. Behind closed doors, James's addiction quietly poisoned the relationship. Carly later wrote that he did not reveal the severity of his drug use right away. He struggled with heroin, cocaine, marijuana, and alcohol all at once. James would later admit that addiction makes a person emotionally unavailable, no matter how much love is present. Their relationship swung wildly, sometimes within a single day, from closeness to distance, from affection to resentment. Carly wanted intimacy. James withdrew. They separated in 1981 and divorced in 1983 after 11 years together. Even decades later, they no longer speak. Through it all, the music kept reaching people. On July 31st, 1971, You've Got a Friend hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. Carole King had written it after hearing a line in Fire and Rain about loneliness. James recorded his version after being present when she wrote it, and the song connected instantly. At the 1972 Grammy Awards, both won for the same song. It became a defining moment in his career. By 1976, his greatest hits album quietly became one of the most successful records of all time. It peaked at only number 23 when first released, then kept selling year after year. In 2012, 36 years later, it re-entered the Billboard 200 at number 15. For a man who had once been homeless and hospitalized, the longevity was staggering. Over the decades, James Taylor collected 40 gold, platinum, and multi-platinum awards. Every album he released from the mid-1980s onward went platinum. His Grammy wins stretched across 6 decades, from 1971 to 2020. In 1998, he received Billboard's Century Award. In 2000, he was inducted into both the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and the Songwriters Hall of Fame, introduced by Paul McCartney himself. James Taylor's world with Carly Simon always felt bright on the surface. Yet underneath everything, there was a quiet trembling that never really stopped. Their marriage began in 1972, and the public saw 2 stars holding hands, raising 2 children, and sharing songs that felt carved out of the same heartbeat. But as the years moved forward, there were cracks forming in places Carly could not see at first. James had a small studio apartment on West 70th Street, only a few blocks from their home at 135 Central Park West. He said it was for rehearsing, a place where he could work without distraction. For a while she believed him because she wanted to, but he was living a different life inside those few blocks. Her husband was keeping someone else there, a woman named Evey, and the apartment became a second world that stood painfully close to the first one. He could play with the kids, smile for a moment, and then slip back into that other space without anyone noticing. Carly had already felt herself drifting in the marriage. She had her own complicated friendship with Scott Litt, who would one day help Rem shape songs like Losing My Religion. And in a way, both she and James were clinging to emotional fragments that softened the distance between them. But nothing prepared her for the moment James confessed he needed to be tested for sexually transmitted diseases. The words dropped like a stone. It wasn't just an admission of cheating. It meant she had been placed in danger. She described their marriage as swinging sharply between love and hate, longing and resentment. And the STD confession pushed her into a new kind of heartbreak. It wasn't just betrayal of trust. It was betrayal of basic care. Her pain grew into something that demanded understanding, so she did something few people could ever imagine doing. In her memoir, she describes walking to that West 70th Street apartment with her own set of keys, made quietly by a locksmith. She left James with the kids, not saying where she was going, and she walked straight toward the truth. She wanted Evey to see her as a real person, someone with a family and a life that mattered. She didn't want to be a shadow in the story James had told. When she entered the apartment, everything that had been hidden suddenly became alive in the room. Evey looked at her and spoke with strange confidence, telling Carly she didn't understand James, that he and Evey were connected by shared trines in their astrology charts. It was surreal and cruel, almost dreamlike in how detached it was from the reality Carly lived every day with their children. The idea that the man she married had rewritten their marriage as some misunderstood mistake burned deeper than the affair itself. The emotional chaos around them didn't slow down as the years passed. Addiction had already woven itself around James long before their marriage began, and it kept pulling him farther from the world they were trying to build. Carly described one moment that stayed carved in her memory. At the Chateau Marmont, James injected heroin right in front of her. She said it felt as if she watched him fade into someone she didn't recognize. The hotel was already known for tragic stories, including John Belushi's overdose in 1982, and the memory of that night became a symbol of how deeply addiction had rooted itself in their life together. Later, James entered a methadone program while living on West End Avenue, trying to pull himself out of a cycle that had begun decades earlier. Many years later, in March 2020, James finally broke his silence about what had happened. He was 72 and promoting his audio memoir when he admitted that heroin ruled 20 years of his life. He said he was lucky to still be alive. He explained that you can love someone deeply, but addiction removes you from your own life. He said plainly that he had not been available, not as a partner and not as a father. He had spent years trying to escape depression with drugs, hoping to feel normal for even a moment. His addiction started young, long before fame, long before marriage. By the time he wed Carly in 1972, he was already fighting demons he did not know how to name. Their marriage lasted until 1983, with the separation beginning in 1981. They tried to hold things together for 9 years, raising Sally, who was born in 1974, and Ben, who was born in 1977. But the emotional weight became impossible to carry. Simon later said they had wonderful years, but they knew when things stopped being fixable. Taylor himself later said he was unreliable as a partner. Drugs were at the center of that. Carly admitted something years later that revealed the depth of her wound. She said he was the great love of her life. She said if she heard the song he wrote for her in 1977, she would be gone for the day. Even after everything, the love remained. But she also confessed that after their split, she tried numbing herself with pills and Quaaludes, hoping to feel less pain. She said she liked the feeling but never truly became addicted. It wasn't in her nature. She understood better than anyone that addiction behaves like a third person in a marriage. Always present, always hungry, always taking something that doesn't belong to it. She realized in time that James's problems weren't only about drugs. If the addiction hadn't taken him, something else would have, because the storms inside him would have found another outlet. His depression and his family history were wounds that shaped everything he did. His life after Carly continued to swing between hope and loss. He married Catherine Walker in 1985, a wedding held in a grand New York cathedral. She helped him get sober, and for 11 years they tried to build a stable life together. But they never had children, and eventually divorced in 1996. During that time, James suffered another blow. On March 12, 1993, his brother Alex died from alcohol-related complications after drinking nearly a whole bottle of vodka. He was 46. It happened on James's 45th birthday, a detail that stayed with him for the rest of his life. He wrote, "Enough to be on your way," with that grief in his chest. Recovery was a long road. James said the only way he managed to stay sober was through physical exhaustion. Long walks, biking, pushing his body until the anxiety settled. He pulled himself away from methadone and learned how to survive withdrawal without slipping back. Then, in 2001, he married Caroline Smedvig, a woman he had met years earlier at a Boston Symphony Orchestra event. They waited before dating because he was still married at the time, but after their first date on July 3, 1995, he wrote a song inspired by her that he later called On the 4th of July. They married in February 2001, and 2 months later they welcomed twin boys, Rufus and Henry, through a surrogate. It was the first time in his life he felt steady. This marriage grew past the storms and lasted more than 24 years. Yet the past never completely softened. James and Carly have not spoken in nearly 40 years. In interviews, he said he failed her, and not the other way around. He admitted he fell out of love and felt numb, something he said was worse than anger. Carly said she still wanted to make him whole, even though he gave her nothing in return. She had to learn that love can exist without being returned, which was one of the hardest lessons of her life.